Back to another episode of Vikings Happy Hour. It's brought to you by Lake Monster Brewing, and that's Badass Wood Art. We got some exciting news that just dropped into our lap, Myles, and I'm excited to have an opportunity to talk to you about it. It looks like the Minnesota Vikings have restructure the contract for Kirk Cousins, opening up quite a bit of cap space for us as we go into free agency here. So would love to have you maybe break it down a little bit more. I think you're probably a little bit better than I am at that. And then and then we can kind of discuss what that means for the future.
Yeah, so essentially what the Vikings did today. So last year, let's backtrack. So the Minnesota Vikings last year, they agreed to a contract extension with Kirk Cousins that gave him $30 million in cash. He had a $35 million cap hit for 2023. And so as part of that extension, the Vikings added 2 void years to the contract so that they could spread out his cap hit last year and into this year, so that Kirk would still become a pending free agent after 2023, and they would hit $12.5 million against their cap as part of the void. So that 12.5 was spread out so that they could save money in 2022 cap. Now, fast forward to 2023, the Vikings' current cap situation. Obviously, we knew that they were over the cap. They cut Adam Thielen, Eric Kendricks. They've restructured guys like Jordan Hicks and Chris Reed. We're still waiting to hear guys like Harrison Smith. Zadarius Smith, we'll kind of see. And then we've heard that they've signed or agreed to sign tight end Josh Oliver, and then defensive end edge rusher Marcus Davenport. And so that you fast forward to today, the Vikings are still over the cap by quite a. I think it was like 5 or 6 million heading into today before you add in the Josh Oliver, Marcus Davenport signings, which won't become official till tomorrow. The Vikings needed to get under the cap before tomorrow's deadline of 3 p.m., which is the start of the new league year. And so with that, the Vikings, they had a few options with Kirk Cousins. If they were to trade him, then they would save, I think, like 17 million against the cap, but then they don't have a quarterback. They could agree to a contract extension, which all signs coming out of the combine and kind of through the offseason were pointing to the Vikings not really wanting to create a situation or like bind themselves to Kirk Cousins long term. And it sounds like Kirk Cousins wanted that situation to happen. He wanted an extension. Well, the Vikings and Kirk weren't able to come to that agreement this time around. But with those added void years that they did in the extension last year, this allowed the Vikings an opportunity to lower his current $35 million cap hit so that they could spread that into the void years. And so what they did was, and Matt Freese, friend of the show, CTP contributor, he kind of laid it out really well. So the Kirk Cousins had a $20 million roster bonus, which of that $10 million guaranteed salary was converted into a signing bonus. So they spread the $35 million cap hit out through those 2 void years, 2024 and 2025. So essentially, they're saving just around $60 million against the cap this year, and then that'll be prorated into the void year, so that if Kirk Cousins isn't a Minnesota Viking or doesn't sign an extension next year, he'll have a $28.5 million dead cap, on the books, no matter what, whether he's on the roster or not. And
one thing about that real quick is, that number seems very daunting. He already had, I don't know the exact number. I want to say 12 million
12
or
and a
so.
half. It was 12 and a half to start. Yeah.
12 and a half to start. And so when we look at it from the perspective of, you're probably hearing or reading that people are saying, hey, we have like $100 million in cap space next year. We aren't losing all of that, right? Like, so, and what I mean by that is that 12.5 million was already factored into that big number. So It's not like we're adding 28.5 to you taking 28.5 away from that initial big $100+ million number. We're actually essentially adding about 16. So just as like a distinction, but so, keep going with that. Like I said, there's a lot of, this is a lot of good content for even somebody like myself, who, when we talk about restructures and what that means in void years and stuff, it's a bit confusing.
It's super confusing. I think that the best way to look at it is you got to look at what the base salary is. And so Kirk, and if a player has a high base salary, that's usually where the team can pull a lot more money from to create a conversion this year to create more cap space. And Kirk had a $30 million base salary. The Vikings are pulling that roster bonus from that base salary of that $20 million, and they're spreading that out through that prorated bonus and that base salary. Excuse me, I completely let me restart that. So his base salary this year was $10 million, but he had a prorated bonus of $6.25 million, and he had a $20 million total roster bonus. Kind of that $20 million roster bonus plus that prorated bonus plus that $10 million base salary gave you a $36.25 million cap hit for Kirk in 2023. The Vikings took that roster bonus and that prorated bonus and took that down so that you get that base salary plus that prorated bonus of $16 million. That's where that $60 million comes from. And so that's where Kirk will go from a $36 million cap hit to about a $20 million cap hit this year, give or take a few million. So that's where that $60 million comes. It'll come from that prorated bonus and his base salary. And that's where it'll get converted into the void years next year. That's where we got that $28.5 million number from. And so
Sure.
It's super confusing. I'm with you. I'm still like trying to like wrap my head around it, but like,
Yeah.
I have a general idea of how it works, but essentially the Vikings are getting $16 million freed up this year.
Which puts us roughly at about 10-ish million-ish.
Plus, they should be at like
right now.
Plus 10. Yeah.
Yeah, minus obviously the 3.5 that Josh Oliver is going to cost us, and then you got a minus, the cap hit that Marcus Davenport's going to cost us, which will probably put us back in the red. But we have some moves to make with Zadarius Smith and with Harrison Smith taking hopefully a restructure or a cut. So I mean, there's and we still have other levers to pull like Brian O'Neill.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. So so to recap, the Vikings are saving $60 million with Kirk Cousins, but they didn't extend him. So there's no extension. So Kirk still will become, or at least as of right now, is set to become a free agent next offseason. And the Vikings would then just have a $28.5 million dead cap as part of that if they don't agree to an extension before whatever that void year deadline would be. We don't know what that number is. It's usually pretty early though. I would assume it's sometime in February. So then the Vikings, to your point, Ryan, they're sitting about $5 or $6 million negative, plus behind in cap. They'll make 16 here. So that's to your point, about 10 million. So about 10 million in the green or red, whatever people like to call it, plus 10 million. And so then from there they can pay for guys like Marcus Davenport and Josh Oliver, and then. Before tomorrow, I would assume that the Vikings have a plan to at least sign at least one cornerback, if not more, and then maybe another defensive lineman and maybe a wide receiver and a center. So those are the pressing needs that the Vikings kind of have. Center being probably the top, center and cornerback being the top two needs. And so my assumption would be the Vikings are looking to get either Garrett Bradbury back on an extension, or they're looking to sign some other, maybe Connor McGovern that's been floated around by guys like Darren Doogie Wolfson and stuff like that. So I would assume center's the next on the list, and then maybe a corner, Byron Murphy, Sean Murphy Bunting. Those guys have come up. So this move should help give the Vikings more flexibility to make additional moves to the roster, and it keeps them competitive too. And I think that's the big part of it. The one thing the Vikings wanted to do this offseason, we can kind of wrap here after this, Ryan, but the couple of things the Vikings wanted to do. They shed guys like Adam Thielen and didn't post June 1 him, so that they ate that dead cap this year, which gave them more flexibility next year. They cut Eric Kendricks, again, keep long-term flexibility with that money. So they were always looking at over $100 million in cap space in 2024 as of right now. You'll take that $28.5 million of Kirk Cousins, so you're still looking at right around $100 million in cap space next year. For the Vikings, and that's kind of what they've always wanted. They wanted to keep themselves flexible long term. Now we'll see how much they eat into that $100 million in 2024 cap space. I would assume that they'll probably eat 20 plus million just of that future cap to sign guys. But if those guys are long term extension players, they're young players like a Byron Murphy, even a Garrett Bradbury, which would be a long term extension. Those aren't bad things. Those are good things, because those are players that you want to build around and you want to work with beyond 2023, 2024. So we'll see what the plan is, but really exciting to see that the Vikings are kind of holding true to what we were hearing, that They didn't want to extend Kirk Cousins. They wanted to kind of let this play out, but they were still able to save some money to the cap so that they can make additional moves.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of good comments coming in here into the into the comments as well. A couple things I want to quick address. I know that we got to get rolling here, but this move does probably eliminate the fact that there's no trade opportunity now for Kirk, which I know some people are speculating maybe the 49ers, but I think that was all but done once they signed Sam Darnold. You had mentioned center as a big need. Friend of the show, Doogie, apparently is reporting, based on what Tim Slack here is saying, is reporting that Garrett Bradbury's down to 2 teams and we're one of them. So potentially, potentially looking at a reunion with Garrett Bradbury. Davey Chains has mentioned that he's hoping that Kwesi doesn't overpay for aging vets. What's good is, it seems like we're not doing that. It looks like we're letting go of some of these aging vets. It looks like when the ones we are keeping, we're asking them to take some pay cuts. And everyone we're signing so far is young and athletic players. So, we're looking forward to continuing that kind of momentum towards getting younger, getting more athletic in our players. And then Matt Anderson asks, a friend of the show, co-host of the show.
Where's his ass?
Yeah, I don't know why he's not in. If he's in the comment section, I don't know why he's not on the show. But he asked, does this spell the end for Kirk Cousins? What are your thoughts there in the Vikings uniform after this season?
So I think it does, just based off of everything we heard. The Vikings and Kirk Cousins could not agree to an extension. And I think this would have been the perfect time to agree to a quote unquote long-term extension. But that extension for the Vikings always needed to be flexible. And Kirk has always been about the guaranteed money and the upfront money. And so I think that they kind of came to a head with this, and this is kind of their happy medium, at least for the Vikings, more of a happy medium. But I think Kirk has always said he's never had any problems going to free agency. So I think it does spell the end of the long-term relationship with Kirk Cousins beyond after 2023. But it doesn't shut that door completely, because technically the Vikings could still come into an extension. And this time next year, or whenever that void years accelerate in the offseason next year, Kirk will be 36 or coming up on 36. I've kind of mentioned this before, like Kirk's leverage will continue to shrink with the Vikings. And the Vikings are doing this situation with the dead cap where they're not going to force themselves into a contract extension with Kirk because of that dead money. They know they know what they're doing in this case, that they're not going to force themselves to make a bad financial decision just to keep Kirk Cousins so that they can lower that dead cap number next year. And so I think it closes the door, but I don't think it closes the door completely. But I think it does kind of put that like distance between the Vikings and Kirk Cousins long term, and that we should expect, whether it's this year, this draft, or next, that the Vikings will be looking to draft a quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of comments asking, are we going to, be going to the draft for a quarterback? Let's hope so. But again, the top 4 guys are likely out of our reach. So we're looking at guys like Tanner McGee, Hendon Hooker, Stetson Bennett. And these are going to be more, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or later round guys. So we'll see. We don't have a ton of draft capital. So if it's not this year, it more likely then would be next year when we have a little bit more capital. And I think it's probably going to be a little bit more of a fruitful draft for quarterbacks next year. So, well,
real quick, It looks like the Vikings. So there a little bit more detail came out of the restructure. So this is they just took the $20 million roster bonus that was due on Friday and converted that into a signing bonus. So instead of taking his base salary down, all they're doing is they added 2 void years to this deal, which that'll still accelerate. So the void year part will still accelerate into $28.5 million next year.
Yep.
If he's not in the roster. But what that does is just help spread out that money, or that help them create more of a current cap space without having to touch the base salary. So the Vikings could still essentially trade Kirk Cousins if they wanted to. This makes that a little bit easier because of the money and how that money would work. But again, I don't see that happening. But this just a little bit more of that detail that came out.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And then the only other quarterback news today is Nick Mullins. Apparently, we're excited to potentially be bringing him back. Yeah, so we're bringing Nick Mullins back, or at least it's reported that he's going to be coming back. No details on that as of yet, but that has been reported as well. So as more of this news comes out, restructures, cuts, signings, any of that, we're going to be here. Vikings Happy Hour is going to be here. Hopefully at will live shortly after those things happen. If not, we'll be doing some recap episodes each day during this free agency frenzy. So keep an eye out for us. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're trying to hit 3,000 subscribers by the draft. We're making our way towards there. So any of that will help. So please subscribe if you enjoy the content. There's going to be plenty more coming your way here in the next probably few hours. So until then, Skol Vikings.